Senate Democrats have just adopted a $3.5 trillion infrastructure package, not the $1.2 trillion package that passed with bipartisan support and awaits the president's signature. I'm talking about bill number 2, the $3.5 trillion package. It includes an extension of an expanded child tax credit, which I think of as a form of guaranteed income, at least for families that have children, which makes this all the more reason to have a conversation with my next guest. Michael Tubbs wears many hats. One of them is that he's a special advisor to California Governor Gavin Newsom for economic mobility and opportunity. He's the former mayor of Stockton, California, and the author of the forthcoming book, The Deeper the Roots. And Michael Tubbs joins me now. Michael, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. You're a young guy. When did you first run for office?
I first ran for office during my senior year in college. So I was a 21-year-old, had no idea about even how to run a campaign when I ran for city council. So I was commuting from Stanford back to Stockton and not sleeping. And thank God I made the hour and a half drive intact, because sometimes I was really sleep deprived. And then I was mayor at 26.
When I was 23 and in law school, I ran for the Pennsylvania state legislature and lost by 419 votes. Not that I'm carrying that around with me or anything, but so in your case, you then went from city council to mayor of Stockton. And while you were mayor of Stockton, among other things, you were able to launch a guaranteed income experiment. What did that consist of?
Yeah, so in 2017, I have to give the year because the world was different. It was before my good friend Andrew Yang announced he was running for president. It was before stimulus checks. And I worked with a group called the Economic Security Project to really test this idea of a guaranteed income, with the rationale being that poverty and economic insecurity was really the root of all the issues people were on Nextdoor and on Facebook complaining about, whether it was crime or homelessness, educational attainment, et cetera. So we gave 125 families from throughout the city that looked like the city, many of whom were working, some who weren't. The median income of the group was about $40,000, which is in line with the city's median income. $500 a month with no strings attached. We started giving out the money in 2019, continued all through the year 2020, and it was the first sort of city mayor-led guaranteed income program in this country. And since then, we've seen sort of the question move from can we give people money to how much money should we give people and how often? And there was just a poll we did with Data for Progress that showed that in just 1 year, support for guaranteed income went from 45% of voters to 55% of all voters, including 33% of Republicans.
What's the philosophy behind it? What's the idea? What's different about guaranteed income?
I think the philosophy that's different is threefold. Number one, this idea that poverty is a policy choice, and it's not because of individual failures. And because poverty is a choice, we can choose to end it. Number two, this idea that we can trust people with money. We can trust people who don't have money with money, just like we can trust people with money with money, in terms of not having strings attached in terms of how people should spend the money, or not having a bunch of regulatory hoops to jump through. And the third thing about the guaranteed income that I think underpins the philosophy is this idea that we all help create the wealth that this country generates, and we all should benefit from it in some way. And I think so those three things are really aligned, in my opinion, with American values, but sometimes push against how we usually make policy, particularly for those who may not have as much means.
You know that critics say, well, people will squander it. If you give them money, they're going to spend it on things that are not necessities. I know you have heard and responded to this 1,000 times, but you'll have to make it 1,001. What did you find in Stockton that people spent money on?
And what we found in Stockton, what we found in data from stimulus checks, and what we're going to find with the child tax credit is that the vast majority of people spend money the way you and I spend money. So yes, there's some people with guaranteed income, without guaranteed income, that may spend money on frivolous things. But the vast majority of people, particularly people in economic insecure circumstances, spend money on utilities, spend money on food, spend money on their kids, spend money on bills. And what we saw in Stockton was exactly that. The vast majority of the money was spent on food, then utilities, like getting the car fixed, then on merchandise and supplies for kids. And less than 1% of money was spent on drugs and alcohol. because folks understand the need to pay for rent, the need to pay their car. Like people get what they have to do to live, and I think the data shows that we can actually trust people to make the right decisions for themselves and their families.
Did you see any signs of a disincentivization? Is that even a word? Did you disincentivize people to work by giving them $500 per month for 2 years with no strings attached?
What we did actually, we incentivized people to take jobs with dignity. We gave folks the agency to decide what type of work they wanted to do so they weren't forced into exploitative or terrible working conditions. And actually, what we saw was that those who received the guaranteed income were 2 times more likely to go from part-time work to full-time work than those who did not receive the guaranteed income. So folks were working more. We also saw that those who received the guaranteed income were less likely to be unemployed than those who did not receive the guaranteed income. And it's because the cash helped free up time, but also helped remove barriers. So if it was not having enough money to go to the dry cleaners to clean your uniform, or needing to get the car fixed, or needing to have a babysitter come watch the kid, or needing to take time off part-time work to go interview for a full-time job, the $500 allowed people to do that. So I would argue that actually poverty is a disincentive to work, that not having enough makes it harder for people to get to work because it's expensive to get into the car, to pay for gas, to buy lunch, to get your uniform clean, to have childcare, et cetera.
What happened to the folks in Stockton who were part of this pilot program when it ended?
Yeah, so that's part of the data, that research that's going on now. But what we've heard anecdotally is that a lot of people were very smart and used that one-time money to pay off one-time things. So instead of making ongoing commitments with the $500, they did fixes that they needed to do that could set them up. So what does that mean? So I keep harking about car, but one individual used 2 months of the basic income to get a new transmission because they knew the program would end, but they could pay for something lasting with that transmission that allows them the flexibility to get to work, pick up kids, et cetera. We know other people took the $500 and took time off work to interview for full-time jobs that they now have. So they're making more money now than before the program because they had a little bit of breathing room. And we've seen countless examples of people using that money to pay sort of down payments for a new apartment or for some housing, understanding that they wouldn't have the $500 every month to pay for the rent, but all they needed was the $500 to help with the down payment, the 3 months rent required to get in somewhere. And once they were able to do that, now they're able to keep up with their rent. So it's for me, Mike, what's been amazing is how people know what to do with money. Like people really know, looking at their financial situation, what makes the most sense for them and their families. And we've seen that play out. And I think we'll continue to see so.
I imagine that you schooled everybody to make sure they recognized, hey, you're getting this basic income, this guaranteed income for a defined time period, and don't be dependent or expecting that it will continue because there's going to come a day where it will end. I'm just thinking in your pilot program,
Yeah.
if you gave me $500 a month, I'd grow comfortable with the knowledge that I was receiving it. And all of a sudden, the day that it's not there might be problematic.
Yeah, no, so I was very adamant, like to your point, I would say, well, look, because we actually extended the program from 18 months to 24 months because of the pandemic. And when we did that, I said, let's make sure we make it very clear that there will be no more extensions. Because I don't want to set people up for failure. I don't want to set people up
Exactly.
for expectations. I don't want to set people up for like, he'll always find a way to continue it. So we messaged and sent text messages. And when folks would check in and ask questions, we remind people. And then I think for me, it came to a head where I was like, okay, you're out talking about trust people. Michael, you need to be able to trust people that they understand when you say the program's on the end, they understand what that means. So finally, towards the end, I just took a deep breath and said, okay, we've done our part. And I think folks will understand that it's coming to an end. And what we've seen is that folks are incredibly thankful, but realized it was coming to an end. And a lot of folks were actually saving the money and not spending a lot of it. And they were just saving it because they knew it would end. And last thing, Mike, what was interesting, we found in some of the interviews is that a lot of people thought the program would end before the 18 months or before the 2 years. So every month they thought the program was going to be over. They weren't sure if it would continue. So they would do things like save money or do things like transfer money to other accounts so that they would have it. And so I think the vast majority of folks were smart and understood that this is not a forever thing, but a real opportunity to get a leg up and pay off some debt and things of that sort.
So I'm now looking at a headline from last month, the CBS affiliate in Sacramento. Headline: Tubbs, that would be you, applauds guaranteed income plan. The dateline is Sacramento, and it says, in what would be the first state-funded guaranteed income plan in the United States, California lawmakers on Thursday approved $35 million for monthly cash payments to qualifying pregnant people and young adults previously in foster care. What was most shocking to me about the story, Michael, both votes in the California Senate and Assembly were unanimous. 36-0, 64-0, respectively, some abstentions, but the plan did get some bipartisan support. How was this able to be sold on a bipartisan basis? And give me the short version. What is this pilot program going to consist of?
Yeah, well, I just have to give a lot of credit to the governor, who put the money in the budget, and then to sort of the budget chair, the speaker, the majority leader, et cetera, for really getting consensus and really showing what I said earlier, that the data proves that even some Republicans are supportive of an idea that we don't want to have poverty. And essentially how the program will work is that I started a group called Mayors for Guaranteed Income. And under that group, there's about 13 mayors in California that are setting up guaranteed income pilots, in addition to county supervisors, in addition to community groups. And they'll apply to the state for matching funds for their programs ongoing. And priority, again, as you said, will be given to those programs that focus on foster youth and pregnant people. And what's exciting about the foster youth conversation is that foster youth are legally our kids. They're the children of the state. So the idea is to not be deadbeat parents, to foster children, but make sure they have everything they need to transition to adulthood. And on the pregnancy piece, we know that poverty is a stressor. We know that poverty leads to low birth weights. We know that poverty makes it hard to parent. It has impacts on both the mother and the child. So the idea is to really reverse some of the negative public health trends, to reverse adverse childhood experiences, and give every kid a fair start and a healthy start. So I'm excited to see where these pilots go. And hopefully we get to the point where we have a policy, where we have a permanent child tax credit, where we have a permanent guaranteed income, and everyone can benefit from everyone not being poor and anxious.
Is it a net economic loss to the government or the system when we have a basic or guaranteed income program? In other words, is there any argument here that we get it back and that actually it pays for itself or comes close to paying for itself?
Yeah, I view it as an investment. I view it as, and as you know, when you invest, you may not see the dividends in the first year or even the second year. But 10, 15, 20 years, you get a unicorn. And I think that's exactly what happens with guaranteed income. We're investing in the future. We're investing in kids being able to focus in school. It's a crime prevention strategy. We saw in the data in Stockton, that's also a health strategy, that those who receive the guaranteed income were less stressed, less anxious, and were able to kind of take care of preventable illnesses. We know it's a homeless prevention strategy. We know that so many people are homeless, not because they're drug addicted, not because they're mentally ill, but because they can't afford rent and they were evicted. And usually that's about $300, $400 being short. So part of it is we have to just change our thinking and understand we have to take the long view of society. And I truly think a guaranteed income unleashes productivity, makes you more productive, increases consumer spending. Folks are spending their money and it's going to circulate in local economies, but also has impacts on health, on public safety, on education. And it's really a down payment to the society I think we all deserve to live in.
Thanks for being so gracious with your time. Just a final question or two, if I may. On a larger scale than where you rolled this out as the mayor of Stockton, where can you point me or my listeners across the country where we can see this being implemented and understand the virtue that you would tell us about it?
Yeah, what we're seeing now, there's going to be two really large pilots, one in LA County, which is doing $40 million and 1,000 families for 3 years, getting $1,000 a month. It's the largest program in the country. And the data from that, I think, will sort of show at scale. And then LA City is also doing 1,000 people at $1,000 a month for 2 years, right? So I think those two things will be indicators. And then as we led the show off with, at the larger scale, looking at the data for the stimulus checks, the 4 times the federal government has to give folks money, and also this child tax credit, where 90% of families with children are receiving $200, $300, $500 a month for the next couple of years. I think those will show us that We're not going to wake up and become Venezuela. We're not going to wake up and see bread lines. We're not going to wake up and people are just going to stop working. But what we'll see is employers having to raise wages and compete. What we'll see is people being able to choose to spend time with their families and or choose what type of jobs they want to take. What we'll see is folks being happier, healthier, more productive. And I think particularly with this Delta virus surge, we'll be able to actually abide by public health standards and get tested or stay home, get vaccinated, shelter in place, et cetera.
Michael Tubbs, great primer on basic or guaranteed income. Thank you so much for being here. I wish you good things.
Thank you for having me, brother. Always good to talk.
You too.